Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
This is KRWG Public Media, TV, radio, online. News that matters. Now, across the Mesilla Valley and the borderland, the stories that shape our community. From the KRWG Broadcast Center at New Mexico State University, this is Newsmakers.
Hello and welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Anthony Moreno. On January 16th, New Mexico's legislative session will kick off. A 30-day session, New Mexico lawmakers will focus on crafting a budget for the next fiscal year. Joining us now to discuss the session and issues his organization is focusing on is Fred Nathan, founder and executive director of Think New Mexico. Fred, thanks for joining us again on the program.
Anthony, thank you for having me back.
I'd like to start off for our audience members who may not be familiar with your organization. Can you share with us a little bit about your organization? And I understand your organization is celebrating a monumental year.
That's right. We just turned 25. We've been around for a quarter of a century. And Think New Mexico is a results-oriented think tank serving New Mexicans. We're a little bit different than most of those think tanks. They're either way over on the left or way over on the right. We just believe in a state like New Mexico that's at the bottom of too many of these national rankings, that the focus ought to be on solutions rather than political ideology. And consistent with that, we have a board of directors made up of Democrats, Republicans, and independents. Many of them are statesmen and stateswomen. So, for example, we have a former Republican governor, Gary Carruthers, who your viewers are probably very aware of. We have a former Democratic Attorney General, Paul Bardicke. The chair of our board is Roberta Cooper-Ramo, the first woman president of the American Bar Association. And we're best known for a law to make full-day kindergarten accessible to every child in New Mexico, and another effort to repeal the tax on groceries. More recently, we had a successful campaign to end predatory lending, and also to take the double tax off of Social Security income in New Mexicans, off of low and moderate income New Mexicans. So that's who we are.
Well, congratulations on the anniversary. I want to dive in on some of the issues your organization is working on during this legislative session. Education, a major issue that your group is focusing on with education reform initiatives. Can you kind of give us an understanding about what you're really going to focus on this legislative session? And some of it has to do with those in the classroom, teachers.
Yes. So several bills. First, we want to start at the top with school boards. The training right now that school board members receive really needs to be enhanced. So, for example, they are superintendents in New Mexico who work for these school boards, on average, have a tenure of about 2 years, actually a little less than 2 years. And when we talk to superintendents about why that is, many of them tell us it's because these new school board members, they get elected and they immediately want to fire the football coach, the athletic director, maybe the third grade teacher. And they have to explain, well, actually, that's not your role. That's not your responsibility. That's what I do as a superintendent. And it really goes back to the training. And we think that they need to receive more training and better training, first in roles and responsibilities of school board members. Another area is budgets. We did a study over looking at 12 years of budgets for all 89 districts in New Mexico, and found that 61 of the 89 grew their administrative spending faster than their spending in the classroom, where the teaching and learning takes place. So we think they could profit from more training about budgets and getting more dollars to the classroom. And then a third area is academic outcomes. 2 years ago, the school board in Los Lunas was replaced by PED for corruption. And the Albuquerque Journal went down and met with the superintendent there to say, well, what was it like? And his response was, in the 9 months that I worked with the school board, I can't ever remember them talking about curricular issues or academic outcomes. They always just wanted to know who had the school bus contract or the HVAC contract. So every school board should have an academic goal, and they should be given training in what they can do as school board members to raise outcomes in their district. So that's one bill that I think we're going to be getting a message from the governor on. The second bill has to do with transparency.
Let's just dive into what you talked about there, because I mean, there's a lot that you brought up. Getting the training for elected school board officials. How does that work? How do you propose that works?
Well, right now it's done by the New Mexico School Boards Association, and they are supposed to attend training. Another problem that I didn't mention is that the Legislative Education Study Committee looked into that and found that about 25% of school board members currently have not received the training that they're supposed to get, and there's really no consequence for that. So that's an additional problem. So we want to make sure in statute that it's required that new school board members get 12 hours of training, and that returning school board members get 6 hours of training, and that it's put on a portal so that local parents can see whether someone who's, for example, running for school board and is returning, have they received their training? Did they spend the time to get trained to be qualified to serve on the school board? So we're hoping that that will be an incentive for current school board members to get the training that they're required to get by statute.
How do you also focus on getting dollars to the classroom when it comes to the school board? What are you proposing there?
Well, a couple of things. We're also trying to get legislation that would require the PED has to approve, the Public Education Department has to approve every district's budget annually. And we'd like to put it in law that they not approve the budget if the school district is proposing to grow their central administrative office faster than their classroom spending. But another way, and that's been very difficult to get past. The Superintendents Association and School Boards Association argue against having the PED having that power over their budget. Another way to do it is through the training, is to teach school board members how to read these budgets and to understand where the money is actually going, and to ask questions. What we hear anecdotally is that there's a lot of rubber stamping, that the budget's presented from the superintendent and the school board, it's massive, it's hard to understand, there's a lot of jargon. And so we think they need specific training in how to understand these budgets, and also what kinds of questions they should be asking. And we would hope that school board members might ask, for example, Mr. Superintendent, Mrs. Superintendent, if we pass this budget, will it grow classroom spending faster than central administration? And if it does, I can support that. But if it's going to grow central administration faster than classroom spending, then I'm going to vote no. So we think that there's a lot of good that can come from this sort of training that would have immense positive results for students.
How do you feel about transparency when it comes to the school board and candidates who are running for school board, finding out information about them? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's another issue that we're hoping to address this session. And there's two specific reforms that we'd like to see enacted. First is, in 44 states, it's required that all candidates for the school board report their contributions. And we believe, it's 2024, that the public has a right to know who's supporting these candidates for the school board. Currently in New Mexico, only 5 of the 89 districts require their school board candidates to disclose their contributions. We think all 89 districts should require that of all candidates. People want to know, who's behind these candidates. There's a lot of national groups now that are interested in banning books. Some people are interested whether teachers unions are supporting or opposing candidates. And we just think more information, more transparency is better. So we're trying to change that law so that it's not just the 5 largest districts with 12,000 or more students who are required to have their candidates report, but that every candidate for the school board reports all their contributions. The second reform that we're interested in is webcasting school board meetings. This is a long overdue reform. Some school districts are already doing it, less than a majority. I think it's about 40 of the 89 districts. And we'd also like them to post their minutes. In New Mexico, in some of these districts, people live an hour away from where these school board meetings are held. They're working 2 jobs. They want to be involved in their children's education, but it's just not viable to drive an hour each way to attend a school board meeting. Obviously, if you webcast it, that's going to increase public participation, which we think will benefit students in the long run.
Obviously, there's some concerns when it comes to having broadband internet or high-speed internet in many of our rural communities where some of these districts may be that you brought up. Any consideration with that, with this legislation?
That's a really good question, Anthony, and one that we're going to have to look into. But I think the state could help districts that may have those issues to make sure that they can make it accessible to their constituents.
Let's get back to talking about, another issue that you're involved with, and that is also providing resources to teachers in the classroom. And you mentioned, of course, an effort bringing dollars into the classroom and maximizing those dollars. But what about the resources available for teachers that you're working on?
Well, 2 things. In the last session, one of our planks, so we came out with a report last October with 10 sort of big ideas that we think can move the needle for academic outcomes in New Mexico by looking at what's going on in other states and other jurisdictions, even other countries, as to what works. And one of those was to create what are called teacher residencies, where a new teacher isn't just thrown immediately into the deep end and given a class, but is paired up with a seasoned teacher and is essentially an assistant teacher for a year to see about how the dynamics of the classroom work, discipline, how you control a classroom, and all these practical things that you don't get at the colleges of education. So that bill got $13 million, and it's reaching about a third of new students. We'd like to see that appropriation increased. What's really compelling about these teacher residencies is that it's been shown that the teachers that have this last in the profession almost twice as long as teachers that don't have a residency. And so we think this can be a very effective way to make teachers, improve the quality of teaching, but also to address the teacher shortage that we have in New Mexico. And on that point, Anthony, we have another bill that we're trying to get a message from the governor to reduce the class sizes of elementary schools in New Mexico. In many cases, we still have elementary school classes that have, 35, 36 kids in a class. And we think we can improve the teaching environment by capping these classes at more like a number like 20. And that will reduce some of the attrition that we're seeing with elementary school teachers.
How do you really accomplish that, though? I mean, New Mexico's had issues with having a teacher shortage in recent years. Obviously, they made some investments to address that, and there's been some positive results from what's been reported. But how do you really address that when there is that concern about having enough staff already?
Well, again, we would phase this in, and we're confident that what would happen, so for example, right now in state law, full day kindergarten classes are supposed to be capped at 20. But we did research and found that 32% of classes currently have more than 20 students. And one of the things that leads to this teacher shortage is that teachers get frustrated that they can't really make a difference when they have 30 kids in a classroom. And so there's enormous attrition. And one way to reduce that attrition is by lowering these class sizes to something closer to 20. And we would phase this in over 7 years so we could see how it works. So we'd start first with kindergarten and then just go up the ladder. Next year would be first grade, second grade, and so forth up to sixth grade. Now, I should concede that when you look at the data on reducing class sizes, it's all over the map. But where it's consistently been shown to be effective is with the youngest learners in elementary schools. So we would focus on elementary schools and phase this in over 7 years. And the numbers right now on reading and math proficiency are so low, we really have to do something dramatic to improve the foundation of these children's education.
I mean, how much of a difference? I know you have folks, doing research on this, and former teacher also involved with this process, and you talk with teachers as well and educators. And I'd like to hear, though, a little bit more. What's the difference when you have a smaller classroom compared to that, where a teacher may know every student, may know the parents of every student, compared to a classroom where you may have 35 or more students?
Yeah, and I'm so glad you asked that question. So our education reform director is a woman named Mandy Torres, who was New Mexico's Teacher of the Year in 2020. And she gives a great example because she taught a third grade class with 15 students and a third grade class with 27 students. With 15 students, she not only got to know her students very well, she got to know their parents. And there was a great partnership formed between her and the kids and their parents. And it was a very successful year, and her kids were really thriving. The next year, she had 27 students. And if she were here, she would tell you it was more like triage. And she really didn't feel like she could give the students as much attention as they needed. It's partly the reason that she left the profession and came to work for us. So we benefited from that, but she really feels strongly that these classes should be capped at about 20 is really the maximum that one teacher can give an adequate education to each student and give them the individual attention that they need.
What gets lost when you don't have that extra time to spend with a student?
If she were here, she would say probably on literacy, where you really need to work individually. You can't really teach reading as a group. And so what gets lost is that reading proficiency. And we see it in the numbers where only about, I think it's a quarter of students in New Mexico are reading at grade level. And it's really important to start early on in those early years in first grade and second grade and third grade and lay that foundation. And that can only be done when the teacher can work individually with students.
Yeah, reading, obviously a concern for a lot of folks in New Mexico when it comes to our students, as well as math literacy, as well, some issues there. I want to move on to another topic that your organization has been pretty vocal about, and that's financial literacy. Can you share with us a little bit about the steps your organization has taken and just how positive you feel about this being implemented in New Mexico?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question as well. So this is something we've been working on for about 3 years, and it actually started before we did this education initiative when we were working to end predatory lending in New Mexico. This is where we had companies that were charging interest rates on small loans of up to 175%. And we asked ourselves, well, what are we doing in the schools to teach kids and high schoolers about credit and how credit works and how 175% can get you into a cycle of debt? And we looked around the country, and this was 2019, and there were 6 states then that had laws requiring that every student take a semester-long course in financial literacy. And this is, Anthony, just the basics of budgeting, how banks work, investing, credit, and so forth. And fast forward to today, and now 25 states require a semester-long course in financial literacy. And those 25 states collectively reach 53% of students. So this is something that's really a very large trend that's caught on across the country, and we're hoping we can pass it here. New Mexico currently 49th, according to Wallet Hub, in financial literacy. Currently, it's required to be offered in every high school as an elective. So we looked at the data from PED and discovered that actually only about 11% of students are taking advantage of that elective. And that's why we feel it's important that it should be required. All students would benefit from a course like this. And we also took a poll of New Mexicans, and 78% of adults think that it's urgent that New Mexico pass this law and require that all students have a semester of financial literacy. Only 9% opposed to that, and the rest undecided. So it's got the public support. We're now trying to get the legislature to adopt this. The governor's supportive, and we've built out a huge coalition that ranges from the state treasurer, the state auditor, various chambers of commerce, the New Mexico banks, and United Way of Central New Mexico have all jumped on this coalition. So we hope this will be the year that it passes, and I hope your viewers will contact their legislators there in Las Cruces and encourage them to support this legislation.
Another issue that we've seen within schools is just politics entering into school board meetings as well as assessments, curriculums. I'd like to hear some more from you about what your organization is working on to depoliticize assessments in schools. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and that's not a bill that we're going to be addressing this session. So there's not that much to say, but that has been an issue in the past, and we're sort of working behind the scenes with the Legislative Education Study Committee that I think will be coming out with a bill next year on that issue, and I'm not as up on it as they are.
What are some things that caught your attention that made you concerned about that issue?
It's been an issue for a while, and again, Mandy would be better on this question than I would be.
That's fine. I want to move on and talk about other issues that your organization has been involved with, of course. Something you've been very vocal about, and that is reforming PARA, the pension reform you're talking about in New Mexico. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So the PARA is the Public Employees Retirement Association, and a lot of state government employees, about 100,000 New Mexicans, that's about 5% of New Mexicans, depend on PARA to invest their pensions. And the board that invests it, there are no real requirements. And we were very influenced by a study that Stanford University did, looking at pensions across the country. And right now, New Mexico, like other pensions, is underfunded. So if they had to pay out all the investments that they've made, they could not cover all the employees that have paid in. And this Stanford study showed that it's very important, obviously, what your investment returns are. And they found that boards that had people on the board with investment backgrounds tended to perform better, higher investment returns than those that didn't have that. New Mexico, the PARA board here, nobody on the board is required to have a background in investments, but they're making very critical decisions, very complicated decisions about things like private equity, hedge funds, venture capital, that really require a background in finance and investments. So we're trying to change the law so that a majority of the board, at a minimum, has an investment background.
This is an issue as I mentioned, you've been vocal about. You've also brought forward some issues of professionalism that have happened within these board meetings. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, there's been a lot of dysfunction on the PERA board. It's gotten better recently, but sometimes they have, in years past, like 2 years ago, they couldn't even agree on who the chairman of the board would be. They couldn't get approval for their agendas and to proceed with the meetings. In one meeting, one board member accused another board member of stealing her phone. So they've been really racked with a lot of dysfunction, which we think could be improved in getting the focus back on investments and away from personalities and so forth. And again, we think this requirement to have a background on investments would help to center them on the really important issues rather than some of these personal issues that have bogged them down in the past.
Now, I only have 30 seconds with you, so I kind of want to leave it with you on some major issues that you're really hopeful can get passed during this legislative session.
Yes, so first, those two bills relating to school board members we think are absolutely critical. We also think this bill to revamp the size of elementary schools and cap classes at 20 students per grade from kindergarten to sixth grade would be instrumental in improving academic outcomes. There may be another bill on extended learning time. That's important. Teacher residencies is another thing that could propel us forward. So there are a lot of academic reforms out there that I think can help to accelerate student outcomes. And we hope that your viewers will go to Think New Mexico's website and go to our Action Center, where they can learn more about these particular bills and contact their legislators from our website and express their support for these reforms.
All right, Fred Nathan is Executive Director of Think New Mexico. Fred, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Anthony, for having me back.
That's our time for now. You can join us this week on KRWG Radio. Every weekday, it's morning edition 5 to 9, fresh air at 11, followed by Here and Now, noon to 2, and All Things Considered, of course, from 4 to 7. KRWG News is always online at krwg.org, and we always want to hear from you. You can email us with a story idea or video submissions. The address is feedback@nmsu.edu. For all of us at KRWG News, I'm Anthony Moreno. Have a great week. We'll see you next time on Newsmakers.